one more time to the Op Center, where we put a wargamer's focus on historical conflicts. I'm your host, Ariskany, and in this episode we're wrapping up our 30th anniversary look at the 1991 Persian Gulf War. So far we've looked at the lead-up to the Persian Gulf Crisis and Operation Desert Shield, reviewed the air phase of Operation Desert Storm, and looked at the opening battles of the Gulf War's ground phase. When we left off, however, the ground war was just getting started. The date is 24 February 1991, G-Day for the start of the ground offensive. Along the coalition's left wing, 300 miles deep in the Arabian Desert, 18th Airborne Corps has seized forward operating bases deep behind the Iraqi flank. On the east wing, the U.S. Marines and Arab allies have hit the Iraqi divisions in Kuwait itself. The plan is, on day 2, once the main Iraqi force in Kuwait is pinned in place, 7 Corps will launch the main assault out of the west, slashing in a huge left hook that will cut behind the Iraqis and seal them off. But modern war is nothing if not fluid, and halfway through day 1, Coalition Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf already has to make major changes to his battle plan. In Kuwait, on the coalition's right wing, things were actually going a little too well. The Marine Corps' frontal shove into western Kuwait was supposed to be a fixing offensive, designed to lock the bulk of the Iraqi army in place long enough for the U.S. Army, the British, and the French to sweep around behind them from the west. But the Marines, supported by Army tanks and multiple launch rocket system batteries, had instead cracked the Iraqis wide open in western Kuwait. Tens of thousands of Iraqis were already surrendering, and the full-scale retreat out of Kuwait had begun before the left hook could get into position. They say no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Well, on G-Day, Schwarzkopf may have lamented that no battle plan survives first contact with the United States Marine Corps. It was time for some hurry-up offense. New orders came down, slashing a whole day out of the already aggressive timetable for the 18th Airborne and especially the 7th Corps. Remember, 7th Corps wasn't supposed to start their offensive until day 2, but that was brought forward to basically right now. By 1500 hours on G-Day, 15 hours early and with just 2 hours notice, 7th Corps had attacked and was across the line. They were screened by 1st U.S. Infantry Mechanized Division, the Big Red 1, with 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment to the left and 1st Cavalry Division to the right. Here, the Iraqi army actually mounted a stand-up fight, fortified in a system of trenches, artillery, minefields, and bunkers called the Saddam Line. But British and American artillery and MLRS fire had been ferocious, and the Saddam Line was soon cracked wide open. Tanks of U.S. 1st and 3rd Armored Divisions began to pass through the breach, followed by the UK 1st Armored Division and the Egyptian, Saudi, and Syrian units immediately to their east. The size of 7th Corps cannot be overstated. It was actually a small army unto itself. In all, it included 142,000 men, 48,500 vehicles and transport aircraft, 1,587 tanks, 1,502 APCs, 669 pieces of artillery, and 223 helicopter gunships. 7th Corps also burned through 5.6 million gallons of fuel, 3.3 million gallons of water, and 6,075 tons of ammunition per day. This huge formation now started its eastward wheel to cut off the Iraqi army. Here, however, it would begin to meet major units deployed in the Iraqi backfield. That's the Armored and Mechanized Divisions, followed by the Republican Guard Divisions. On 25 February, the British hooked eastward, their 1st Armored Division meeting the Iraqi 52nd Division in an engagement that was equal parts short, one-sided, and less than pleasant. Another major battle took place in the wee hours of Day 3, where 1st Armored Division struck through a sandstorm to hit tank and mechanized units of 26th Division at Busayyah. Meanwhile, as 7th Corps continued to pivot east, forward elements of U.S. 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment soon ran into a reverse-slope defensive position of the elite Tawalkana Division, first of the major Republican Guard units to engage. This kicked off the Battle of 73 Easting, named for its grid coordinates in an otherwise near-featureless desert. Initially outnumbered and outgunned, the Bradley APCs of 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment locked with the Tawalkana before Abrams tanks and Apache gunships sealed the deal. Through the day, the battle expanded, with U.S. 3rd Armored Division engaging the rest of Tawalkana to the north, and British 1st Armored re-engaging 52nd Division and supporting infantry divisions to the south. Vicious fighting and relentless coalition advances continued through the night, where coalition tanks demonstrated a clear edge in thermal imaging and night fighting. By the morning of 27 February, the last full day of the war, 7 Corps had almost completed its eastward wheeling movement. The Battle of 73 Easting had now given way to the Battle of Norfolk, widely regarded as one of the largest tank battles in history. If you're looking for a climax to the Gulf War, this is probably it. U.S. divisions included 1st Infantry, 1st Cavalry, 2nd Armored, and 3rd Armored, along with the British 1st Armored. The Iraqis had the remnants of the Tawal-Kana Republican Guards, 10th, 12th, and 52nd Armored Divisions, 25th, 26th, 31st, and 48th Infantry Divisions, and 4 more armored and mechanized brigades. So yeah, not exactly a skirmish. Simultaneously to the north, U.S. 1st Armored Division was taking on the Medina Armored and the Adnan Motorized Republican Guard Divisions in what history would call the Battle of Medina Ridge. Combined with Norfolk, this huge battle was apocalyptic, and coalition victory was absolute. For 32 killed and a handful of destroyed APCs and damaged tanks, 7 Corps tore the heart out of 10 Iraqi divisions, 4 brigades, hundreds of tanks destroyed, 12,000 prisoners taken, and we'll never really know how many enemy killed or wounded. For all intents and purposes, the Gulf War was over. Even as the U.S. Army and British were sealing off Kuwait from the northwest, U.S. Marines and Arab allies were still engaged in heavy fighting in Kuwait itself. Their biggest battle would come near the end of the war at Kuwait International Airport, where 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions would collide with Iraqi 3rd and 6th Armored Divisions, 1st and 5th Mechanized Divisions, and 10 more Iraqi infantry divisions. Admittedly, the Marines received huge support from the U.S. Army's Tiger Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division. This included 66th Armored Regiment and 3rd Battalion 41st Infantry. Offshore bombardment and airstrikes from the U.S. Navy also played a key role. Marine and Army tanks slugged it out with the Iraqis over open desert and airport runways, while U.S. Special Forces engaged with Iraqi commando battalions. Even with this gigantic battle in progress, however, Kuwaiti units were given the honor of leading the liberating advance into Kuwait City itself. Not only was this just the right thing to do, but it played a key role in maintaining the legitimacy of the coalition's overall mission and the Gulf War in general. The war was called to a halt with a unilateral ceasefire coming into effect on the morning hours of 28 February 1991. The ground war had lasted just 100 hours. Nevertheless, scattered fighting continued in the confusion that followed. The biggest example was the controversial Battle of Rumaila on March 2nd, where elements of 24th Mechanized Infantry Division engaged and wiped out a convoy of Republican Guard vehicles, quote, advancing toward them. Bear in mind that most U.S. armored units were in fact behind Iraqi forces, and these Republican Guards were probably trying to retreat out of the battle area. The one-sided slaughter went on for 6 highly questionable hours. The American commander was twice investigated after the war for this incident, but no fault was found. At last we come to gaming in the Gulf War. As with any conflict, you have plenty of options, and the first choice is what command level you and your crew would like to try. Starting at the top, if you're interested in pinning 4 stars to your collar and taking on the role of General Schwarzkopf, consider titles like Line in the Sand by TSR. This is one of the first games to come out about the Gulf War, published the very same year the Gulf War took place. It uses many of the same mechanics as TSR's successful and personally recommended Red Storm Rising game. Probably the best candidate is the more advanced Desert Storm: The Mother of All Battles, published by Command Magazine. One of the things many of these games have in common is a solitaire option. This is important given the completely one-sided nature of the ground war in the Gulf. Honestly, do you really have a chance as the Iraqi player in any realistic 1991 war game? Instead, the game challenges the coalition player to achieve a range of difficult objectives against a very aggressive timeline, all while taking the bare minimum of casualties and keeping a wary eye on world opinion. Good computer games for the Gulf War include Patriot by Artec or Steel Panthers 2, Modern Battles, or the MBT edition, both by SSI. These date from the mid-90s, however, so they might be tough to run on modern systems. When it comes to unit-scaled command tactical wargames, well, no one who knows me will be terribly surprised here. The best option is Panzerleader. Specifically, I'm talking about the Tactical Combat Middle East variant produced by Toshash Miniatures. This is a fantastic update to the World War II classic, able to recreate anything from Abrams and Apaches to B-52s and MLRS barrages, even the vaunted A-10 Warthog. Every game piece is a platoon, so a stack can be a company, building into a total force of battalions or task forces in small pickup games, regiments and brigades in normal games, or even whole divisions if you're really ambitious. Games like this are really your only option if you're serious about recreating battles like El Khafji, El Busayyah, or 73 Easting, or even significant pieces of big battles like Norfolk, Medina Ridge, or Kuwait International Airport. And I know hex and counter games aren't always everyone's first choice, but for the Gulf War this might be players' best option. After all, the ground war lasted just 100 hours. Will you really spend the money and time building miniature forces for a conflict with such a narrow application? I mean, I have, but I have personal reasons for wanting these armies, and even I don't expect to seriously see them on the table that often. But if miniatures are your thing, again, we have lots of options. GHQ Micro Armor is always a favorite of mine for a number of reasons. The platoon-based unit scale, the 6mm miniature scale, means that you can put large battles on the table at the insane ranges seen in Gulf War engagements, all at a relatively low cost, fitting for a war that, again, has such a limited range of application. Clicking up to 10mm, consider the new Plastic Soldier Company release, Northag. Now I know this sounds crazy, but for those interested in recreating battles between UK 1st Armored Division and the Iraqi 52nd Armored Division, this could be done at 10mm with the Northag system, with British Challenger 1s and Warrior APCs against Soviet-made T-55s and T-62s. Just leave off the T-64s, T-80s, and yes, even the T-72s, as the British never really tangled with the Republican Guard in 1991. Clicking up to 15mm, consider the Gulf War as a more grounded, history-themed angle for your Team Yankee forces, to include the Fate of a Nation and Oil Wars releases. Almost anything in the Gulf War has already been produced by Battlefront Miniatures, with Soviet, Egyptian, and Syrian T-55s, T-62s, and T-72s naturally filling out your Iraqi force. French AMX-32s can fill out your French, Qatari, and Saudi forces, and French ERC-90 armored cars fought on both sides as well. This was the avenue taken for my Gulf War Marine Corps force. I used the Ryan's Leathernecks and LAV platoon boxes as a starting point, even if I had to create my own ERA panels for my Marine M60s. Syrian T-54-55 boxes and BTR-60 platoons set up my Iraqi armor. Honestly, the battlefield ranges on these games will be a little compressed, but US Marines also fought in much more urban environments, where lines of sight were artificially compressed by the terrain at places like El Khafji and Kuwait International Airport. Of course, all of this is only the beginning of the discussion of the Gulf War. The after effects of the conflict are rife with controversy and cannot be ignored. Friendly fire and coalition overkill, to include bulldozer tactics at Iraqi trenches, are contentious subjects to this day. There are the environmental effects of mass oil well fires started by Saddam, up to and including the first man-made nuclear winter. Medical effects like Gulf War syndrome and the depleted uranium controversy continue to be discussed. Leaving Saddam in power and not invading Iraq proper was largely decried by hawks at the time, but I really hope that the tragedy of the 2003-14 Iraq War has since settled how terrible such a move would have been. Even so, abandoning the Kurds in 1991 and 92 hardly remains America's finest hour. American troop presence in Saudi Arabia, even at 1% Gulf War levels, were used as excuses for incidents like the USS Cole and the Al-Qaeda attacks of 9/11. And of course, the open issues left by the Gulf War may have led, however deceitfully, to the second war with Iraq starting in 2003. Clearly, there's a lot to discuss here. I hope you'll continue the conversation in the comments with feedback, questions, or anecdotes of your own. Meanwhile, I hope you've enjoyed this Op Center series, marking the 30th anniversary of the Gulf War. Maybe learned a thing or two, or even better, been inspired to try the Gulf War on your own gaming table. But for now, this is Oriskany, and as always, Tango Mike for listening.